The meeting room was quiet. Too quiet. Kyle Porter stood in the center of the large space with his hands folded in front of him. He wore a simple dark suit and looked calm. Behind him stood two people. They were his guards. Jake Morrison was on the left. He had gray hair at his temples and wore a dark suit like Kyle. Lisa Grant stood on the right. Her black hair was pulled back tight. She also wore a dark suit. Both guards stood with their hands behind their backs. They looked relaxed. The room was inside a huge space station called Nexus Prime. This station floated in space between many different worlds. It was where species from all over the galaxy came to talk and make deals. Today, humans were meeting with the Krix Empire. The Krix were tall reptile creatures. They had scales and sharp teeth. Their leader was named Vexthor. He was 8 feet tall and covered in dark green scales. The meeting had started well. Kyle and Vexthor were discussing trade. The Krix wanted human technology. Humans wanted access to Krix mining colonies. It seemed like a fair deal. Then something went wrong. Vexthor said humans had insulted his empire. Kyle said they had not. Vexthor became angry. His eyes turned red. He stood up fast. His chair fell backward with a loud crash. 6 Krix guards entered the room. They were even bigger than Vexthor. Each one carried a plasma rifle. The weapons glowed with blue energy. They pointed the rifles at Kyle. Vexthor spoke in a deep voice that echoed in the room. He said Kyle would come with them. He said the human had to answer for his crimes against the Krix people. Other beings in the room started to panic. There were diplomats from 20 different species watching the meeting. Some reached for their communication devices. Others moved toward the exits. A being made of crystal stood up. Her name was Zelnara. She was the meeting's official mediator. Her job was to keep everyone calm and follow the rules. Zelnara's body flashed purple. This meant she was upset. She pressed a button on her desk. Alarms should have sounded. Security should have arrived. But Vexthor had planned ahead. He had blocked the security systems. No help was coming. Zelnara spoke loudly. She said Vexthor was breaking council law. She said all weapons must be lowered immediately. Vexthor ignored her. The 6 Kree guards moved closer to Kyle. Their heavy boots made the floor shake with each step. They formed a half circle around the human ambassador. Their rifles stayed pointed at his chest. Each guard wore thick armor. The armor covered their bodies from neck to feet. It was designed to stop bullets and energy blasts. It made them look even bigger and more dangerous. Everyone in the room looked at Jake and Lisa. The 2 human guards had not moved. They still stood behind Kyle with their hands behind their backs. They looked calm, too calm. This confused the watching diplomats. The diplomats whispered to each other. They pointed at Jake and Lisa. Why were the guards not doing anything? Why were they not calling for help? Where were their weapons? This was the part that made no sense to most species. Human diplomatic guards never carried weapons. Everyone knew this fact. It had puzzled the galaxy for 15 years, since humans joined the Galactic Council. Their guards always came unarmed. No guns, no blades. No energy weapons, nothing. They wore simple suits. They carried only small communication devices. That was all. Other species thought this was foolish. Some thought humans were naive about danger. Others thought it was some kind of trick. Many species had tried to understand why. They sent spies. They asked questions. They watched human guards carefully. Nobody could figure it out. The humans would only smile and say their guards did not need weapons. This answer satisfied no one. Vexthor saw that the human guards were not reacting. This made him confident. He stepped closer to Kyle. He was now only 10 feet away. His tongue flicked out to taste the air. He spoke again. He said this was Kyle's last chance. The human could come peacefully, or his guards could try to stop them. Either way, Kyle was leaving this room as a prisoner of the Krix Empire. Kyle did not look scared. He turned his head slightly to look at Jake. He spoke in a normal voice like they were discussing lunch plans. He said he would like to finish the trade agreement before dinner. He asked Jake to please resolve this situation. Jake nodded once. It was a small movement. Then everything changed. Jake moved. He moved so fast that most people in the room did not see it happen. One moment he was standing still. The next moment he was next to the first Krix guard. The guard was holding his rifle. Then he was not. The rifle clattered to the floor. The guard made a confused sound. Then he fell down. He did not get back up. Lisa moved at the same time. She went to the left while Jake went right. Her movements looked like dancing. She was graceful and smooth. She reached the second guard before he could turn his rifle toward her. She touched his arm in 3 places. Fast touches like she was tapping him on the shoulder. The guard dropped his weapon. His arm went limp. Then Lisa pushed him and he fell over. The other 4 guards tried to respond. They had trained for combat their whole lives. They were supposed to be the best warriors the Krix Empire had. But they could not keep up. Jake was already moving to the next guard. He grabbed the guard's wrist. He twisted. The guard spun around. Jake pushed and the guard crashed into another guard. Both fell down in a tangle of armor and limbs. Lisa dealt with the 5th guard. This guard tried to hit her with his rifle like a club. Lisa ducked under the swing. She stepped close to the guard. She struck him in the chest, then the stomach, then the neck. 3 quick hits. The guard's eyes rolled back. He collapsed. His armor made a loud sound when he hit the floor. The last guard was backing away. He was trying to aim his rifle. His hands were shaking. Jake and Lisa both moved toward him. He fired his weapon. The plasma bolt went wide. It hit the ceiling. Smoke and sparks rained down. Before he could fire again, Jake was there. Jake simply took the rifle from his hands. It looked easy, like taking a toy from a child. Then Jake struck the guard once in the head. The guard fell. 16 seconds. That was all the time it took. 6 armed Krix warriors in heavy armor, all of them unconscious on the floor. Their weapons scattered around them. Jake and Lisa walked back to their positions behind Kyle. They were breathing a bit harder. But they looked fine. They put their hands behind their backs again. They stood like nothing had happened. The room was silent. Everyone stared. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They could not believe what they had just seen. Some diplomats had their mouths open in shock. Others were recording everything on their devices. They would watch the footage again and again later. They would slow it down. They would study every movement. They still would not understand how it was possible. Vexthor stood frozen. His red eyes were wide. His mouth hung open, showing all his sharp teeth. He looked at his guards on the floor. Then he looked at Jake and Lisa, then back at his guards. He could not process what had just happened. His best warriors had been defeated in seconds by 2 humans. Without any weapons, Kyle straightened his tie. He looked at Zelnara. He spoke calmly like they had been interrupted by a small delay. He suggested they continue with the meeting. But first, he said, Vexthor should probably apologize. The Krix had broken council law. They had threatened a diplomatic representative. That was a serious crime. Kyle said he was willing to overlook it if Vexthor apologized, and the trade talks continued. Medical teams rushed into the room. They checked the unconscious Krix guards. After a few minutes, the medical chief gave his report. All 6 guards would be fine. They had bruises. Some had sore muscles. But no broken bones. No permanent damage. They had been defeated with perfect precision. Just enough force to stop them. Not enough to cause real harm. This made everything even more mysterious. Jake and Lisa had moved with incredible speed and skill. They had defeated 6 heavily armed and armored warriors. And they had done it without hurting them badly. Without weapons. Without breaking a sweat. The question that everyone was thinking was simple. What were human diplomatic guards, and why did they carry no weapons when they were clearly the most dangerous beings in the room? Commander Tarzek sat in his office 3 days later. He was watching the video again. He had watched it 47 times already. Each time he watched, he became more confused. The commander had 6 eyes. His species could see in many directions at once. They could process information very quickly. But even with all his eyes and all his experience, he could not understand what he was seeing. The video showed Jake Morrison moving across the meeting room floor. Tarzek had slowed the footage down. Even in slow motion, Jake's movements were hard to follow. The human seemed to know exactly where to step, exactly where to strike, exactly how much force to use. It looked impossible. No one should be able to move like that without years of practice. Maybe not even then. Someone knocked on his door. His assistant came in. Her name was Pelrin. She was young and carried a data tablet. She told Tarzek she had the medical reports. The commander asked what the doctors had found. Pelrin looked at her tablet. She said all 6 Krix guards would recover fully. They had bruises and sore muscles, but nothing was broken. No organs were damaged, no lasting injuries at all. Tarzek found this detail very interesting. The medical team had examined the guards carefully. They found that each strike from Jake and Lisa had hit specific points on the Crick's bodies. Pressure points, nerve clusters, places that would cause unconsciousness without permanent damage. The doctors said whoever attacked the guards knew exactly where to hit. They understood Crick's biology perfectly. This made no sense to Tarzek. The Cricks had only joined the Galactic Council 20 years ago. Most species took decades to learn about alien biology. Medical students studied for years just to understand one other species. Even combat experts needed lots of time to learn where to strike safely. How could human guards know all this after only a few years of training? Pellerin checked her tablet again. She told the commander something surprising. Human diplomatic guards only trained for 3 years. Before that, they worked in human military or police forces. But the special diplomatic training was just 3 years. That seemed like very little time to become so skilled. Tarzek shook his head. 3 years was not enough. He played another section of the video. This part showed Lisa Grant fighting 2 guards at once. She moved between them like water flowing around rocks. She struck one guard on the arm, then the other on the leg, then back to the first one. Each strike was precise. Each one had a purpose. She made it look easy. The commander pointed at the screen. He explained what bothered him most. Lisa had performed a very difficult technique. She needed to know 17 different things at once. The density of Crick's bones, the location of their secondary nervous system, the exact angle to strike, the right amount of force, the timing. Everything had to be perfect or she would kill the guard instead of just stopping him. She did all this while moving at full speed. Pellerin suggested maybe humans had cybernetic implants. Maybe computers in their brains helped them calculate everything. Tarzek had already checked this. Council law required all diplomats to undergo medical scans. The scans were very thorough. Jake Morrison and Lisa Grant were completely normal humans. No cybernetic parts, no genetic modifications, nothing special in their biology at all. The commander pulled up Jake's personnel file. Jake Morrison was 42 years old. He had served in human special military operations for 12 years before becoming a diplomatic guard. His physical abilities looked average for a human. His strength was normal. His speed was normal. There was nothing in the file that explained his performance. He should not be able to do what the video showed. Lisa's file appeared next to Jake's. She was 38 years old. She had worked in human law enforcement and military units for 10 years. Then she trained for 3 years to become a diplomatic guard. Again, her physical scores were normal. Good but not exceptional. Nothing suggested she could defeat multiple armed warriors in seconds. Pellerin asked if they should contact the Human Diplomatic Security Office. Maybe they would explain their training methods if asked politely. Tarzek said he already tried that. The humans had sent a very long response. It talked about physical conditioning and situational awareness. It mentioned cultural sensitivity training, but it did not explain the important parts. It did not explain how guards became so skilled so quickly. Tarzek opened more files. This was what really worried him. The incident on Nexus Prime was not unique. Over the past 15 years, there had been 47 similar events. 47 times someone had attacked human diplomats. 47 times the unarmed guards had won. They defeated armed opponents every single time. They never failed. They never needed backup. They never needed weapons. The screen showed images from different incidents. Human guards stopping assassination attempts. Human guards protecting ambassadors from riots. Human guards defeating cybernetically enhanced killers. In every case, the guards won without weapons. In every case, the attackers survived with minor injuries. The pattern was clear. Human guards were extremely dangerous, but also extremely controlled. Tarzek leaned back in his chair. He told Pellerin what he thought the real problem was. Everyone had been asking the wrong question. The galaxy wanted to know why humans did not arm their guards, but that was not the right question. The right question was why humans would need to arm their guards. What if the guards themselves were more dangerous than any weapon? He explained his theory to his assistant. Humans had evolved on their home planet for millions of years. During that time, they became very good at combat. They fought each other constantly. They developed thousands of fighting techniques. They became the most dangerous creatures on their world, not because they were the biggest or strongest, but because they were smart and determined and willing to practice until they were perfect. Pelrin looked uncertain. She said other species also fought. Other species had wars and combat training. What made humans special? Tarzek thought about this carefully. He said maybe it was not one thing. Maybe it was a combination. Humans came from a heavy gravity world. This made them strong. Their planet had many dangerous animals. This taught them about survival. They had a long history of war. This gave them experience. But more than that, Tarzek said, humans seemed to have a cultural obsession with unarmed fighting. They called it martial arts. They had developed it over thousands of years. Hundreds of different styles. Each culture on Earth had created its own fighting methods. Some focused on strikes, some on grappling, some on using the opponent's force against them. Humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of fighting without weapons. The commander showed Pelrin something else. He had researched human history. He found information about human fighters from long ago. There were records of humans defeating armed opponents with bare hands. Stories of masters who trained for 50 years. Tales of warriors who could kill with a single touch. At first, Tarzek thought these were myths. Now he was not so sure. Pelrin asked what they should do with this information. The council would want answers. Other species were nervous after seeing the video. Some thought humans had been hiding their true military capabilities. Others worried that humans might be planning something. The council needed to know if humans were a threat. Tarzek closed all the files. He told Pelrin to arrange a meeting with Ambassador Kyle Porter. But not an official meeting. It should be informal, private, no recording devices, no other council members present. Just a conversation between two people trying to understand each other. The commander suspected that humans had been waiting for someone to ask the right questions, someone who approached them with curiosity rather than fear. He looked at the frozen image on his screen one more time. Jake and Lisa stood behind Ambassador Porter. Their hands were clasped behind their backs. They looked relaxed and peaceful, but now Tarzek saw them differently. They were not peaceful because they were weak. They were peaceful because they were strong enough not to need violence. That was a very different thing. Pelrin left to arrange the meeting. Tarzek sat alone in his office. He thought about what he had learned. Humans were not hiding a secret weapon. Humans were not planning an invasion. They were simply a species that had learned to be dangerous in a very specific way. They had mastered unarmed combat to such a degree that weapons became unnecessary. That was both impressive and terrifying. The question now was whether the galaxy could accept this truth. Could other species understand that humans were powerful without being aggressive? Could they see that not carrying weapons was actually a sign of confidence? Or would fear and misunderstanding lead to more problems? Tarzek hoped his meeting with Ambassador Porter would provide some answers. The galaxy needed to understand humans, and humans needed to help them understand. Commander Tarzek arrived at Ambassador Kyle Porter's quarters exactly on time. The room was large and comfortable. The walls displayed items from Earth. Tarzek noticed old weapons hanging on the wall. There was a long curved sword, an axe with elaborate designs, a short spear, a small dagger. All of them looked ancient but well preserved. Kyle was preparing tea when Tarzek entered. The human ambassador smiled and pointed at the weapons. He explained what each one was. The curved sword was called a katana. It was 600 years old from Japan. The axe came from Viking warriors over 1,000 years ago. The spear was from the Zulu people about 200 years old. The dagger was Roman and over 2,000 years old. Tarzek found this interesting. Kyle collected ancient weapons, but his guards carried none. The contradiction was obvious. Kyle handed the commander a cup of hot tea. He said he appreciated that Tarzek came alone. Most species would have made this an official inquiry with recording devices and multiple witnesses. Coming alone showed respect. The commander sat down and sipped his tea. It tasted pleasant. He told Kyle the truth. After watching Morrison and Grant's performance, he felt a conversation was better than an interrogation. The galaxy was nervous. If humans had some military advantage that others did not know about, the council needed to understand it. Not to control it, but to understand it. Kyle sat across from him. He spoke calmly. There was no secret, he said. No hidden technology. No biological advantage beyond normal human evolution. The truth was simpler than most people thought, but also more complex. He walked over to the weapon display. Humans had created thousands of weapons throughout their history. They became very skilled at killing each other. Too skilled, in fact. But alongside weapons, Kyle explained, humans developed something else. They created systems of fighting without weapons, techniques to defeat armed opponents using only their bodies. This was not because humans were peaceful. It was because sometimes they needed to stop someone without killing them. A prisoner had more value than a corpse. An opponent who surrendered could provide information. Not every fight needed to end in death. Tarzek pointed out that every species had some form of hand-to-hand combat. This was not unique to humans. Kyle agreed, but he asked the commander to consider humanity's specific evolutionary path. Humans evolved as hunters on Earth. Earth was a dangerous world by galactic standards. It had higher gravity than most inhabited planets. This made humans naturally strong. Kyle continued his explanation. Earth was home to millions of species. Many of them were dangerous predators. Some were much larger than humans. Early humans had to compete with these creatures. They learned to hunt animals that could easily kill them. They developed persistence. They would chase prey for days until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. This taught humans patience and endurance. But humans also fought each other, Kyle said. Different groups competed for resources. They had tribal warfare. Later, they had organized armies. Wars between nations. Conflicts that lasted generations. Through all of this, they kept developing new fighting techniques. They studied what worked and what did not. They created schools to teach combat. They wrote books about strategy and tactics. Tarzek was listening carefully, but he still did not understand how this explained Morrison and Grant. The speed they showed, the precision, the knowledge of Crick's biology. How did 3 years of training produce such results? Kyle smiled. He said 3 years was not the whole story. That was just the diplomatic training. The guards already had decades of experience before they even started. The ambassador explained the recruitment process. The diplomatic security service only accepted people who already had 10 to 15 years of combat training. They recruited from military special forces, elite police units, professional martial artists who competed at the highest levels. These were not ordinary people. They were individuals who had spent half their lives practicing combat. Then, Kyle said, these already exceptional people went through 3 more years of specialized training. They studied the anatomy of every council species. They learned about alien biology and physiology. They practiced against opponents in armor. They trained with people using energy weapons and cybernetic enhancements. They learned diplomatic protocol and cultural sensitivity. By the time they graduated, they had between 15 and 20 years of total combat experience. Tarzek leaned forward. But why, he asked. Why invest so much time and effort into unarmed guards when a simple weapon would be more effective? A plasma pistol could stop any threat instantly. It would be cheaper and faster than years of training. Why choose the harder path? Kyle asked a question in return. Would a weapon really be more effective? Think about what happened 3 days ago. If Morrison and Grant had carried weapons, what would have happened? Tarzek thought about it. There probably would have been a firefight. Guards on both sides shooting at each other. People would have died. The room might have been damaged. It would have been a disaster. Exactly, Kyle said. Instead, 6 Kree guards were recovering with minor injuries. No one died. No one suffered permanent damage. The Krix Empire apologized formally. Trade negotiations continued the next day. The entire council saw that humans could defend themselves without killing. They saw that humans preferred non-lethal solutions when possible. That was worth more than any weapon. Kyle stood and walked to the window. Outside, the space station stretched in all directions. He explained that not carrying weapons was itself a message. It was a statement. It told the galaxy that humans were confident in their abilities, disciplined in their training, committed to peaceful solutions. They trusted their guards to handle any threat without resorting to killing. And it was terrifying, Kyle added, once people understood what it meant. An armed guard could be disarmed. Take away their weapon and they become helpless. But a human diplomatic guard was never unarmed. Their body was the weapon. Every strike they made came from years of practice. Every technique they used had been refined over thousands of years of human martial development. They could not be disarmed because the weapon was them. Tarzek thought about this for a long moment. He said he understood now. Humans had become so good at unarmed combat that weapons became unnecessary, at least for diplomatic security. Kyle nodded. Yes, he said. Humans had plenty of armed forces, soldiers with guns and missiles and warships. But for protecting diplomats, they chose a different approach, one that showed both their capability and their restraint. The commander asked if there was something else. Something Kyle was not saying. The ambassador smiled again. Tarzek was perceptive. Yes, there was more. Kyle explained that humans had learned something important during their violent history. The more weapons someone carried, the more likely they were to use them. Having a gun made it tempting to shoot. Having a blade made it tempting to cut. By removing weapons from diplomatic guards, Kyle said, humans removed that temptation. The guards had to think. They had to use skill and intelligence. They had to apply exactly the right amount of force for each situation. No more and no less. This made them better at their jobs. It forced them to be precise, to be controlled, to be professional. And it sent a message to the galaxy, Kyle continued. Humans were serious about peace. They would not draw weapons first. They would always try to resolve problems without violence. But if someone threatened their diplomats, if someone tried to prevent peaceful solutions, they would face guards who had devoted their lives to combat. Guards who could defeat armed opponents with nothing but training and determination. Tarzek set down his empty teacup. He said the council would want a formal report about this meeting. Kyle said he expected that. Tell them the truth, the ambassador said. Human diplomatic guards do not carry weapons because they do not need them. They are already dangerous enough without weapons. Anyone who mistakes their lack of arms for weakness will learn a difficult lesson. The commander stood to leave. He thanked Kyle for the tea and the explanation. As he walked to the door, he looked at the ancient weapons on the wall one more time. He understood now why Kyle kept them. They were reminders. Reminders of what humans once were, what they could still be if necessary, but also reminders of what they chose not to be anymore. They chose control over chaos, precision over power, peace over violence. That choice made by such a dangerous species was what made them truly remarkable. Commander Tarzek's report created immediate interest across the galaxy. Within 1 week, 15 different species submitted formal requests. They all wanted the same thing. They wanted to observe human diplomatic guard training. There were long diplomatic discussions about this. Many meetings. Many arguments. Finally, humans agreed. They would allow a small group of observers to visit their main training facility on Earth. 6 months later, Pelrin stood outside a large building in Seoul, South Korea. The training facility was huge. It covered several acres of land. There were modern buildings mixed with older traditional structures. Gardens and training grounds spread in all directions. 5 other observers accompanied Pelrin. They came from different species. All of them were senior military or security officials. All of them wanted to understand human guards. A woman met them at the entrance. Her name was Director Helen Chang. She was in her 50s but moved with fluid grace. The way she walked reminded Pelrin of Morrison and Grant. There was control in every movement. Nothing was wasted. Helen welcomed them and set clear expectations. They were here to understand, not to copy. These methods worked for humans because of human history and culture. Other species would need their own approaches. Helen led them into a large gymnasium. 30 trainees were exercising. Some were running. Others practiced movements. 2 were sparring in a roped area. They moved quickly and precisely, but nothing looked superhuman. Pelrin mentioned this. The trainees looked like any well-trained fighters from his species. They did not seem special. Helen smiled. That was because they were fighting each other, she explained. Come see something else. She led the group to a different area. Here, human trainees worked with instructors from other species. A tall Krix was teaching defensive moves. A Nexari demonstrated attack patterns with energy weapons. A Vulcan instructor ran through combat scenarios. The observers stopped and watched carefully. Helen explained what they were seeing. This was year 2 of the training program. Trainees spent 12 months learning about every council species. They studied anatomy, psychology, combat methods. They practiced against alien opponents wearing real armor. They learned where to strike different body types, how to defend against different weapons, what techniques worked across multiple species. One observer stepped forward. His name was Vormak. He was a Krenth general. He watched a human trainee defending against the Krix instructor. The trainee was adjusting techniques in real time, changing position for the height difference, adapting to the armored plating, compensating for the longer reach. Formack said this level of tactical thinking required years of experience. No one could learn it quickly. Helen told them about the trainee they were watching. She was 34 years old. She started martial arts training at age 6. She competed internationally in multiple fighting styles. She served 8 years in special military operations. She had 28 years of combat experience. Not classroom training. Real experience. Actual practice. That was what they were seeing. She gestured around the facility. This was what most people missed about human diplomatic guards, Helen said. Humans did not take ordinary people and train them for 3 years. They recruited people who had trained their entire lives. People who started as children. People who made combat their life's focus. Then they gave those exceptional individuals 3 years of specialized alien combat education. Helen brought them to an observation room. Below them was a massive simulation chamber. Inside, 2 guards faced multiple holographic opponents. The holograms looked real. They carried weapons. They moved like they were trying to kill. The guards moved through the scenario smoothly. They disarmed opponents. They controlled crowds. They protected a simulated diplomat, all without weapons, all without causing permanent harm. This was final year training, Helen explained. Guards ran thousands of scenarios. Hostage situations, assassination attempts, riots, armed invasions. Every scenario had strict rules. Complete the mission without causing lasting injury. Protect the diplomat at all costs. Never use lethal force unless absolutely necessary. There was no other choice. Pellerin asked about the success rate. How many trainees completed the program? Helen thought for a moment. About 30% graduated from the 3-year course. But remember, she said, these people were already exceptional before they arrived. The program did not turn average humans into guards. It turned the best warriors humanity produced into something more refined, more controlled, more precise. Formack spoke quietly. More dangerous, he said. That was what she meant. More dangerous than regular warriors. Helen turned to face him directly. Yes, she agreed. More dangerous. A human diplomatic guard had typically spent 30 to 40 years of their life practicing combat. They understood violence at a deep level. They knew it better than most species ever would. Humanity spent thousands of years perfecting combat before joining the galactic community. But, Helen continued, they also trained in restraint. They learned cultural sensitivity. They studied diplomatic protocol. They knew exactly how much force each situation required. Their job was not to win fights. Their job was to prevent fights. When prevention failed, they ended threats with minimum necessary force. Not one bit more. Not one bit less. Perfect control. Helen led them to a final training area. A single guard worked through a sequence of movements alone. His flow was mesmerizing. Each motion blended into the next. His name was Nathan Cruz, Helen said. He graduated top of his class 5 years ago. Now he returned as a guest instructor. She told them to watch him carefully. Nathan moved through techniques from many different human martial arts. Strikes from one style, throws from another, locks from a third. He also incorporated alien techniques, Crick's power movements, Nixari speed techniques, Volscian grappling methods. Everything blended together seamlessly. Each movement was economical. Nothing wasted. Everything purposeful. Everything devastating in its efficiency. Helen spoke softly as they watched Nathan. This was why human diplomatic guards carried no weapons. Nathan Cruz was a weapon. Morrison, Grant, every other guard in the service. They were all weapons. But they were weapons who chose not to be. Warriors who mastered violence so completely that they could apply it with surgical precision, or not apply it at all. That choice made all the difference. She emphasized one important point. It was not about being better than other species. Every species had their own strengths, their own methods. Humans simply took their most dangerous people and taught them to be protectors instead of killers. The 3-year program did not create the skill. It focused and refined decades of existing ability. It channeled natural talent toward a specific purpose. The tour ended after several hours. The observers had seen enough. They understood now. As Pellerin left the facility, he finally understood what Ambassador Porter meant. Human diplomatic guards did not need weapons because they were weapons. Highly trained, precisely calibrated instruments of controlled force. Every joint lock, every pressure point strike, every defensive movement came from years of dedicated practice. The galaxy had asked the wrong question from the beginning. The question was never why humans did not arm their diplomatic guards. The question was why anyone would think they needed to. A guard with a plasma rifle could shoot opponents. A guard with decades of combat experience could do so much more. They could assess situations, choose appropriate responses, apply exactly the right amount of force, protect without killing. That was far more valuable. On the flight back to the space station, Vormak sat next to Pelrin. The general was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. He said the Krenth Empire needed to rethink their approach to security. They had always believed more weapons meant more safety, bigger guns, heavier armor, more firepower. But humans showed a different path. Maybe true strength was not about how much damage you could cause. Maybe it was about how precisely you could control that damage. Pelrin agreed. His own species would also learn from this visit. Not copy human methods exactly.
That would not work.
But adopt the philosophy behind them. Train security forces to think first and shoot second. Teach them restraint along with combat. Give them options beyond overwhelming force. The human approach worked because it matched human history and culture. But the principles could be adapted. The other observers had similar thoughts. They all came seeking to understand a mystery. They found something more valuable. A different way of thinking about security, about protection, about the relationship between violence and peace. Humans were not pacifists. They were not weak. They were incredibly dangerous. But they chose to channel that danger into protection rather than aggression. That was the real lesson. Not the techniques, not the training methods, but the choice itself. When Pelrin returned to his office, he wrote a detailed report. He explained everything he had seen and learned. He recommended that other species consider similar approaches. Not identical programs, but similar philosophies. The report was long and thorough. At the end, he added one final observation. Human diplomatic guards proved that the most powerful weapon was the one you did not have to use, and the most skilled warrior was the one who knew when not to fight. That wisdom, more than any technique or training method, was what made human guards truly exceptional. The truth about human diplomatic guards spread through the Galactic Council over the following months. Different species reacted in different ways. Some felt concerned. Others felt respect. A few saw it as an opportunity to learn. The discussions were long and complex. Everyone had opinions. But slowly, understanding began to replace fear. The Krix Empire made the first major move. 3 months after the incident on Nexus Prime, they sent a formal proposal to Ambassador Kyle Porter. They wanted to establish a joint training program. Krix warriors would train with human martial arts experts. Humans would learn Krix combat traditions. They called it a cultural exchange. But everyone understood the real purpose. The Krix wanted to learn what had defeated their guards in 16 seconds. Kyle met with the Krix delegation in a private conference room. Vexthor himself led the group. The same commander whose guards had been efficiently disabled. He looked different now. Less aggressive. More thoughtful. He sat across from Kyle and spoke carefully. His tone was neutral but sincere. Vexthor explained that the Krix Empire had a long tradition of honorable combat. They respected strength. They valued skill. What the human guards demonstrated was both strong and skillful. The Krix wanted to learn from it. Not copy it exactly, but understand the principles behind it. Learn the philosophy that made it work. Kyle listened carefully. Then he spoke honestly. He appreciated the gesture, but he needed to be clear about something important. Human diplomatic guards worked because of very specific circumstances, thousands of years of cultural development, particular evolutionary pressures, training methods refined across many human civilizations. Other species could not simply copy the techniques and expect the same results. It did not work that way. Vexthor nodded. He understood. The Krix were not seeking to replicate human methods exactly. They wanted to learn from the philosophy behind those methods, the idea of protection without automatic escalation to lethal force. This was something the Krix struggled with. They were warriors by nature. Sometimes that nature worked against them. Sometimes it caused problems that could be avoided. Kyle found this perspective interesting. He asked Vexthor to continue. The Krix commander leaned forward. He explained what the incident 3 months ago had taught his people. His guards were prepared to kill. The human guards were prepared to protect. When his warriors woke up with only bruises, When they realized they had been thoroughly defeated without serious injury, it changed how they thought about combat. It changed how Vexthor himself thought about strength. The Krix Empire had fought many wars, Vexthor said. They were good at combat. They won most of their battles. But they were not as good at peace. The human guards showed them something new. Maybe true strength was not the ability to kill efficiently. Maybe it was the ability to protect without killing at all. That was a difficult concept for a warrior culture, but it was worth exploring. Kyle considered this carefully, so Vexthor wanted to change how the Krix approached security. The commander corrected him. Not change, evolve. Their warrior culture served them well in many ways, but it also limited them. If cultural exchange with humanity could help them develop better methods of protection, methods that did not always end in bloodshed, it would benefit everyone. The proposal launched broader conversations throughout the council. Other species began examining their own security methods. The Luminari, who were naturally diplomatic, started incorporating human restraint techniques into their peacekeeping forces. The Nexari, whose cybernetic warriors were formidable, began training in non-lethal methods. Species that had always relied on overwhelming force started considering alternatives. Jake Morrison found himself traveling to multiple worlds. He became a lecturer and demonstration instructor. Different species invited him to explain human martial philosophy. These audiences had never considered that violence could be so precisely controlled. They had never thought about having so many options. Jake showed them that it was possible. At one gathering of Vulcian security commanders, Jake explained the core concept. It was not about being weak. It was about having choices, about knowing so many techniques that you could select the appropriate response for any situation. Yes, he could kill an opponent in hand-to-hand combat. He trained for years to be capable of that. But he also trained to subdue without injury, to control without harm, to protect without escalating the violence. Jake demonstrated a basic technique. He showed how the same movement could be adjusted for different levels of force. Same motion, different pressure point, different angle. One version would incapacitate an opponent. Another version would merely control them. A third would simply redirect their attack. The skill was not in knowing the most dangerous technique. The skill was in choosing the right one for each situation. Lisa Grant took a different approach in her teaching. She focused on the psychological aspects of unarmed protection. She explained this to a group of Krenth warriors who were used to carrying heavy weapons. When you carry a weapon, she told them, your mind treats it as the primary solution. It becomes your first option, not your last resort. You think about the weapon before thinking about alternatives. By removing weapons from diplomatic guards, Lisa explained, humans force themselves to develop every other skill to maximum potential. Observation became crucial. Negotiation became essential. Understanding body language, reading situations, positioning yourself correctly. All of these skills had to be perfected because the physical techniques were supposed to be the last resort, not the first response. The impact went beyond security training. Philosophers and cultural analysts began studying what humanity's approach revealed about species development. Some argued that humans developed unarmed combat to such extremes, precisely because they were such effective weapon users. They needed ways to resolve conflicts without constantly escalating to their most destructive capabilities. Otherwise, they would destroy themselves. Others suggested it revealed something about human psychology. Here was a species that could be incredibly violent. They had weapons that could destroy planets, armies that could conquer worlds, but they had also learned to channel that capability into protection and restraint. They weaponized discipline itself. They made control into their greatest strength. That was unique in the galaxy. 1 year after the incident on Nexus Prime, Commander Tarzek attended a Council Security Summit. The topic of diplomatic protection was the main agenda item. Representatives from 30 species shared what they had learned from studying human methods. The discussions lasted 3 days. Everyone contributed. Everyone learned something. The consensus became clear. No species could exactly replicate human diplomatic guards. Their effectiveness came from a unique combination of factors: evolutionary history, cultural development, individual dedication. These things could not be copied wholesale. Each species had their own path, their own strengths, their own methods that worked for them. But the principles could be adapted. The core ideas could be learned. Protection did not require weapons. Security came from skill and training. Discipline mattered more than firepower. Applying exactly the right amount of force for each situation was better than applying overwhelming force every time. These principles were universal. They could work for any species if applied correctly. Ambassador Kyle Porter gave the closing address at the summit. Jake Morrison and Lisa Grant stood behind him as always. Unarmed as always, a living demonstration of everything Kyle spoke about. The ambassador addressed the assembled delegates with calm confidence. He reminded them of why humanity made certain choices. When humanity first joined the Galactic Council, Kyle said, they made a decision. They could present themselves as warriors, emphasize military strength, carry weapons everywhere to prove their power. Instead, they chose to have diplomatic guards carry nothing. No plasma rifles, no energy blades, no weapons at all. This was a gamble. They were betting the galaxy would eventually understand what it meant. Kyle admitted it was risky. What if other species saw them as weak? What if someone attacked thinking humans were easy targets? But humanity believed the gamble was worth it. They wanted to show the galaxy something important. Not that humans were weak or naive or unprepared for danger, but that they were so confident in their capabilities, so committed to peaceful resolution, that they trusted their guards to handle any threat without weapons. The incident on Nexus Prime proved the gamble was right, Kyle continued, and the conversations that followed were even more valuable. The galaxy did not just learn that human diplomatic guards were dangerous. They learned why humans chose to make them dangerous in such a specific, controlled, restrained way. They learned that violence and protection were not the same thing. That being dangerous and being peaceful could coexist. That true strength was knowing when and how to use your abilities. Kyle gestured to the assembled delegates. Every species here had their own martial traditions, their own approach to security. Humanity was not suggesting they abandon those traditions, but maybe they could consider what humans learned through their violent history, that the greatest weapon was the one you did not have to use, and the greatest warrior was the one who could protect without killing at all. Human diplomatic guards carry no weapons because 2 years passed since the incident on Nexus Prime. The galaxy had changed in subtle but important ways. The understanding of human diplomatic guards had spread to every corner of known space. What started as confusion and fear had transformed into respect and curiosity. Species that once questioned humanity's approach now studied it. Some adapted pieces of it to their own cultures. Others simply appreciated the philosophy behind it. Commander Tarzek stood on an observation deck overlooking a training facility. But this was not the human facility in Sol. This was a new joint training center on a neutral world. Here, guards from multiple species trained together. They shared techniques. They learned from each other. They practiced methods of protection that did not rely solely on overwhelming force. The center had been built with support from 15 different species. It was a testament to how much attitudes had changed. Pelrin joined him at the observation window. Below them, a Krix warrior practiced with a human instructor. The Krix was learning how to control his strength, how to subdue rather than destroy, how to protect without killing. It was difficult for him. His entire culture emphasized power and domination, but he was trying. That effort mattered more than immediate success. In another section, a luminary peacekeeper worked with Lisa Grant. The luminary was naturally gentle. His species preferred negotiation to combat, but he was learning that sometimes words were not enough. Sometimes action was necessary. Lisa taught him how to act decisively while still minimizing harm, how to be soft and hard at the same time, how to protect the innocent without becoming a threat himself. Pelrin commented on how different the galaxy felt now. 2 years ago, most species saw security as a simple equation. More weapons meant more safety. Bigger guns meant better protection. But humans had shown another path. Now everyone understood that security was more complex. It required judgment, skill, discipline. Sometimes the absence of weapons created more safety than their presence. Tarzek agreed. He had spent 2 years thinking about what humans had taught the galaxy. The lesson was not really about combat techniques or training methods. It was about choices. Every species could choose how to apply their strength. They could choose destruction or protection, escalation or restraint, fear or confidence. Humans chose confidence. They chose restraint. And paradoxically, that made them more effective at keeping their diplomats safe. The commander received a message on his communication device. Ambassador Kyle Porter had arrived at the facility. He was here for the dedication ceremony. The Joint Training Center was officially opening today. Representatives from all participating species would attend. It was an important moment, a symbol of cooperation and mutual understanding. The ceremony took place in a large hall. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species gathered, military officers, security officials, diplomats, instructors, everyone who had contributed to making the center possible. Kyle stood at the podium with Jake and Lisa behind him. The two guards looked the same as always. Dark suits, calm expressions, hands clasped behind their backs. No weapons visible anywhere. Kyle spoke about the journey that brought them to this moment. He reminded everyone of the confusion and fear 2 years ago. The questions about why human guards carried no weapons. The suspicion that humans were hiding something. The concern that humanity might be a threat. All of those feelings were natural. They came from not understanding. From seeing something different and assuming it was dangerous, but understanding replaced fear. Kyle continued. The galaxy learned that different did not mean dangerous, that confidence did not mean aggression, that choosing not to carry weapons was itself a powerful statement. It said that violence was a choice, not an inevitability, that protection could be achieved through skill rather than firepower, that peace was possible even among species capable of great destruction. Kyle acknowledged the contributions of every species present. The Cricks for being willing to learn new approaches despite their proud warrior culture. The Luminari for sharing their diplomatic wisdom. The Volsians for their tactical expertise. The Nexari for their technological insights. Every species brought something valuable. Every species had something to teach and something to learn. He spoke about Jake Morrison and Lisa Grant, about what they represented. They were not superhuman. They were not enhanced or modified. They were simply humans who had dedicated their lives to becoming excellent at protection. They represented thousands of years of human martial development, centuries of warriors and teachers and students who passed down knowledge, generations of people who believed that violence could be controlled and directed toward noble purposes. More importantly, Kyle said, Jake and Lisa represented a choice. The choice to be dangerous without being destructive, to be capable of violence without being violent, to carry the ability to harm but choose to protect instead. That choice was available to any species, any individual. It was not about being human. It was about being disciplined, controlled, committed to something larger than personal power. After the ceremony, Tarzek approached Jake Morrison. The commander wanted to ask something that had bothered him for 2 years. He asked Jake about that moment on Nexus Prime, when 6 armed Crix guards advanced, when violence seemed inevitable. What did Jake feel in that moment? Was he afraid? Jake thought carefully before answering. He said he was not afraid of the guards themselves. He was concerned about Ambassador Porter's safety. That was his primary focus. He was aware that he would have to hurt people to protect Kyle. That bothered him. He did not enjoy causing pain. But afraid of the actual combat? No. He had spent 30 years preparing for exactly that situation. Fear did not enter into it. Tarzek asked another question. What was it like being a weapon? Jake smiled slightly. He said that was the wrong way to think about it. He was not a weapon. He was a person who happened to be very skilled at combat. The difference mattered. A weapon had no choice. It was used by whoever held it. But Jake had choices. He chose when to act, how much force to apply, whether to fight at all. Those choices defined him more than his skills. Lisa joined the conversation. She added that being a diplomatic guard was about more than fighting. Most of their job involved preventing fights, reading situations, positioning themselves correctly, using their presence to discourage aggression. The actual combat was rare, maybe once or twice in an entire career. Everything else was about being alert, aware, and ready without ever needing to act. She explained that this was why not carrying weapons was so important. If she carried a gun, she would think about the gun. She would see every situation through the lens of having that weapon available. By not carrying weapons, she forced herself to think differently, to see more options, to be more creative in solving problems. The absence of weapons made her better at her job, not worse. Vormak, the Krenth general, joined their group. He had been listening to the conversation. He said that 2 years ago he would not have understood what they were saying. The Krenth believed in overwhelming force, maximum firepower, absolute domination of any threat. But training at this facility had changed his perspective. He learned that there were situations where restraint was more effective than force, where control was more valuable than destruction. Bormak said his people were slowly adapting their approach to security. It was difficult. Cultural change always was. But they were trying. They were training some of their guards in non-lethal methods, teaching them about restraint and precision. It would take generations to fully change their culture, but the journey had begun, and it started with understanding what humans had tried to teach them. As the dedication ceremony wound down, Kyle stood with his guards looking out over the training grounds. Young beings from multiple species practiced together. They learned from each other. They shared knowledge that might prevent future conflicts. They built friendships that crossed species boundaries. This was what peaceful coexistence looked like. Not everyone agreeing, but everyone willing to learn. Everyone trying to be better. Kyle thought about how far the galaxy had come. 2 years ago, an incident of violence nearly destroyed diplomatic relations. Today, that same incident had led to greater understanding. The confusion about unarmed guards had sparked conversations about security and protection. The fear of human capabilities had transformed into respect for human philosophy. What seemed like a crisis became an opportunity. Jake and Lisa remained silent behind him. They did not need to speak. Their presence said everything necessary. They were proof that strength and peace could coexist, that being capable of violence did not require being violent, that the most powerful statement was sometimes the absence of weapons rather than their display. They were warriors who chose protection over destruction, guardians who defended with skill rather than firepower. The galaxy finally understood. Human diplomatic guards carried no weapons because they represented something more important than any weapon could. They represented discipline, control, the choice to protect rather than destroy, the commitment to use exactly the right amount of force for any situation. They were living proof that humanity could be trusted, that humans chose peace not from weakness but from strength. As the 3 humans left the ceremony, other species watched them go.